Hello, everybody. My name is Kushan Hopkins. I'm an instructional technology specialist from Oklahoma Public School Resource Center. And today I get to talk about the SAMR model, one of the wonderful technology integration frameworks that I think is fantastic to use in terms of like putting a piece of technology in your classroom and getting the most value out of it. So I would love to finally break all this stuff down. I've been talking about it in the previous Tech Talk, so pretty excited to get into there. But first, I would very much like to just give a little bit of space. I'm joined here with my colleague. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Kurt Bernhardt. I'm the Director of Technology for OPSRC, and Kushan and I make up the technology team. If you have any technology needs, just let us know.
And you can do that through this email, techteam@opsrc.net. Got it up here. I also have a link to the slides, which I highly recommend. I usually recommend them for all my tech talks on here, but this one in particular, I filled with all sorts of wonderful things and points. And so if you want to follow along, great. If you want to use this as a reference, awesome. I've tried to build out these slides so you can always go back and try to get as much as you can. I guess squeeze all the goodness out of this. So I'm going to read this out since it's case sensitive and copy it as well. Lowercase t period ly / uppercase z as in zebra l v u, and you should be able to get to it through that. All right. So just in case you are like, what the heck is a SAMR model? Real quick, it is kind of a I don't want to say level 4 section, 4 tiered. There is a hierarchy to it, but you don't necessarily have to like go from the bottom and work your way up. But it is made by Dr. Ruben Puentedura. He's fantastic, and he's still kind of working in the field and building on this and doing research and making papers and show up and talking at conferences. It's super cool to be able to talk about something like this and see it kind of mature over time and it being used in a whole lot of places. But the idea is this: you have a piece of technology in your classroom that you want to introduce in there. And then there's different levels and ways that you can think about how it's going to be used in your classroom and what types of impact it might make. This is broken down kind of like 4 sections, hence the SAMR. It's the first letter of each one of these things. Love a little acronym here, but kind of at the lowest level of engagement here, we got the substitution phase, where you introduce technology as a direct substitute for something that you're already doing. So this is kind of the equivalent of, instead of people writing notes in using their pencil, they start typing it in on a Word document, something simple like that. No huge functional changes. It's not that invasive, and it's easier to jump into. The next level right above that is the augmentation phase. So this is taking advantage of the functions of the technology to make improvements to your classroom. So now that you're typing something in your class, this makes it easy because now you can print out your notes, you can share it out with people, you can save the files, you can add images, links, all that good stuff. It's making enhancements on something that you're already doing. But once again, not a huge structural change that you're doing. I mean, so these two are grouped together in what's called the enhancement part over there, hence the little part over there that you see right there. But taking it one step next on there is the modification. This is when you start transforming parts of your classroom. This is when the technology becomes kind of like a daily use here. You have at the modification step, you create tasks completely around it. Like if you're familiar with Google Docs, maybe you'll have the opportunity for students to work together on a single document at the same time as they kind of like do a discussion. Everybody kind of has the same notes, and then they can report some of that out. So that would be transformative, because you're building parts of your classroom around it, and the expectation is that you're going to commonly use it. And at the highest stage of that is the redefinition stage. This is the technology is creating tasks that wouldn't have been available without the technology existing in here. So this is the technology is fully integrated in there. In a case like this, the way a good way to look about it is like, how does the technology that you're using in your classroom connect to what's happening outside of your classroom? How does this extend to be a skill that your students can use throughout their life on here? And this usually takes the most amount of consistent effort, the most amount of planning on here, but the value that you get, or the value that your students get for this at the very least is the biggest here at this step here. So I want to go more detail about each one of these. I'm going to break all these down. I want to give you some applications. Ideally, by the end of this, not only that you'll have an understanding of how SAMR model works and kind of how each section breaks down and just seeing little differences between them, but ideally I want you to be able to apply this in your planning for your classroom. So if you are interested in bringing technology in your classroom, you know, you can kind of guide it through this model. You have a kind of a clear idea on what types of results that you would like to get in it. And, or if you already have something being used in your classroom, you can kind of see, you can really analyze like how it's being used in your classroom and how you can take it up to those next levels here. But first of all, I just want to kind of go over a schedule here so you have an idea of how I'm going to progress through some of this one. Since this is the afternoon version of this, I'm actually going to just kind of build in. This one's going to be a little longer than the other ones, but I assure you there's going to be a lot of value in everything I'm going to be talking about here. So I'm going to try to build you up here. But first of all, you've just got their introduction. Congratulations. We're going to go into my objective here so we have a clear idea of what we're going to get out of this. Next, I'm going to start very broad. I'm going to just talk about technology integration frameworks in general. There's plenty of them out there. In fact, there's going to be other tech talks about some other ones that I think are real groovy. But I just want to talk in general of like, why would you even bother to use a framework? Why wouldn't you just introduce technology into your classroom in there and see what happens? And so I'll kind of give an argument for that. Then we'll take it one extra level more specific. I'll talk specifically about the SAMR model in itself and one thing and reasons why I think it is a useful model to have and to start out with. Then I'm going to break each individual part of the SAMR model. I'm going to go a little bit deeper for that one so you can see the individual pieces, how they relate to each other and how they're different from each other. So it makes it easier for you to clearly identify how a piece of technology is being used in the classroom. And from that, I'm going to do some extensions. I'm going to talk about some applications. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. And yeah, if you have access to the notes, great, you're going to have access to all of that stuff. I'm going to give some recommendations on there. And then I'm going to finish out with my usual. I'll share some goodies, some extension activities that you can have there. Share an evaluation link to the evaluation, answer any questions you might have. And a little extra thing I'm adding there is just some advice, like how to get started. What are some things just to kind of keep in mind as you're working through here? So there's quite a bit to talk about. So let's just dive on in, everybody. First of all, objective here. After this training, teachers will be able to apply the 4 levels of the SAMR model to integrate technology into their classroom. The whole intention is integration of technology. Of course, that's why we call them technology integration frameworks. So the first question that you might be thinking of is, why would I bother to use a framework here? And this might be something that you might already be able to answer if you already use teaching or education frameworks. But I understand that some people are in that situation where they're like, okay, maybe I've been asked to, I know that technology is useful, but I'm just not entirely sure what would be a good way to go about it, or like, where do I start on something like that? So the thing that I was thinking about in terms of like using a framework is like setting up a kitchen. There's so many different parts and things that you have to keep in track of. Like we've all been in kitchens, so we kind of have an idea of what's in them. But if you're going to build one from scratch, like you might be asking yourself the question of like, where do I start? Or what types of products do I need to have in here? Or what are some safety features that I should keep in mind? It's so easy as you're kind of building some of this out to forget things. Or like, let's say, for example, somebody else is creating a kitchen and you want to kind of compare yours to theirs. So how do you do that? How do you have that shared language there? And how do you ensure that like as you're using this kitchen, like how do you ensure that everything is the choices that you make for this, it keeps your kitchen functional over time? And so that's the way that I kind of think about whenever I try to introduce a framework in or try working on something like this is establishing a plan and making sure that everything is effective that you're bringing there. You're not wasting resources. You're getting the most amount of whatever you're introducing here, because it does take quite a bit. It's a cost every time you introduce a something new into your classroom here. And yeah, I believe these frameworks can help out quite a bit with that one. So a little bit of an argument for it real quick. I have a little bit of quote up here, integrated technology. This is from the US Office of Educational Technology. It's in their ed tech plan for 2017. On there, I have that in my references a little later if you want to take a look at it. But they said integration technology should be used to transform learning experiences with the goal of providing greater equity and accessibility. The idea is that you're trying to reach the most amount of people as possible, and make sure that everybody has access, everybody has the right training. And I think that's a good way of going about it. And so a couple of arguments that I have here for technology integration frameworks. First of all of these are research based. It is quite easy. You could go to Google, you can go to your favorite research, like ResearchGate or anything like that. You can go to your favorite place and you can see that all of these frameworks are kind of like living, breathing documents that people are working on. People are using it in their classrooms. People are reporting back of like what type of value that they're going to get in it. So yeah, if you want to have kind of the most up-to-date best practices on here, this is a great place to start in terms of introducing technology in your classroom. Next of which is, I say creativity and autonomy within structure. None of these frameworks mention specific tools. It's all about giving you some kind of structure so you can pick things that are going to be valuable for your classroom. It's all about that end result. What are your students getting out of this? What kind of goals are you trying to accomplish? And so you as the content expert here, as the expert for your students, get to make those choices on what tools you're going to use, but the framework just helps kind of guide you on how those tools are going to be used there. And then finally, this accommodates diverse approaches on here, just kind of building on the last thing that I said on here. It's the teacher that's making the choices on here, and this is just kind of helping you out here. Let's take it one step further. One of the things that I really like about the SAMR model is that it keeps you in mind kind of the lower level stuff. So I talked about substitution augmentation as the enhancement phase. So I think this is a great place to start if you're introducing a piece of technology in your classroom, because you do need to train up your students. You do need to get them more comfortable here with using a piece of technology before you start doing some of the upper level transformative stuff, which is the modification and redefinition stages. So it's a good way. You don't have to necessarily go in those steps there, but it definitely helps you out on like what you should be spending your time on here. Another thing that I like on, and I see it whenever I was doing my research on the SAMR model, I saw it compared to Bloom's taxonomy a bit there. They do share a few similarities here and there. They're not exactly kind of like a one-to-one copy on there. But the one thing that I do like about the comparison here is the fact that the SAMR model gives you clear levels of depth of how far you're using technology on here. It's very similar to Bloom's depth of knowledge, like how you can kind of like check and see where students are at in those different sections. And so this kind of like guides it. Like at the enhancement phases, this is the least complex, and at the transformation stage, it's the most complex, kind of the way of looking at it. Next, goals are supported by tools. So I know the temptation is like you got these fancy iPads, or you got these great VR headsets, or you got these great tools that you have, and you want to throw them in there and use them in your class. But keep in mind, the very first thing that you should try to point out is what is your purpose here in introducing the technology? Because if it's not performing a purpose, if you don't have a clear result for it, you shouldn't put it in your classroom at all. It's gonna be a waste of time, and it's gonna feel like, you know, you did all this work and this tool was supposed to be so great and it was supposed to solve all your problems, but you'll end up, you know, collecting dust in the classroom in there, and you want to try to avoid that. And then finally, it promotes digital literacy. It's arming your students with those skills that they're going to use outside of your classroom. So these are some wonderful opportunities for that. Okay, good. If you're still with me so far, awesome, great, thank you so much. I would love to take an opportunity to break this model down a little bit, because whenever, at least for me, whenever I was working through this model, it was kind of hard for me to figure out, okay, what is kind of the main differences? How do I separate these things so I can identify how a piece of technology is going to be used? So I tried to break this down using a bit more plainer English on here. And that way I had kind of like clear like a structure, like questions and things I could ask, or things that I could always refer back to kind of see where I'm at on here. So yeah, for the substitution phase, the way that I look at it is it makes life easier without making any significant changes. This is, you know, the most basic step that you could possibly be at. So this is kind of like, you know, instead of using a textbook, you got a PDF that you can share with your students. This makes life for you easier because it's saving on resources, saving on time. People have more access to it. You can put a PDF on a website or shoot it through an email, and then people just have it. So this is great place to start on here. And it's great if you're trying to like see what the value is, like what's the practical value of a piece of technology. It would be at this stage where it's the most obvious there. But that is only scratching the surface. We want to try to move, like I said before, I think over here, you want to use that piece of technology to transform what you're doing in your classes. You want to offer something that wouldn't be available elsewhere. So let's move it up a stage at the augmentation stage. The way that I see this, if you're at this stage, is you're taking advantage of the features on here. So this is the thing that I try to look for whenever I'm like creating like the other tech talks where I'm just kind of like focusing on one tool at a time. I try to pull out what are some features here that would stand out, like what makes Nearpod great, or what can I actually do with Google Slides in my classroom? What are some physical activities that I can build out here? But not only the features are important here, but the idea is that I'm able to take these features, these tools, and hand it off to students and have them build and start creating, start getting a little bit deeper with these tools and actually doing something. And it really just kind of depends on what the purpose is going to be. This is real purpose driven. And also it's kind of a shift from how things were typically done, where, you know, in a teacher-centered environment, you have to kind of like shift that control a little bit here at this stage. And it can be a little nerve-wracking. I'll completely agree with you on that. If you've been doing something a certain way for a long time, and now you're just kind of like putting it in your students' hands, it can be a little nerve-wracking, but with a little bit of structure and a little bit of guidance, and students have an idea on how these things being used, this can be a good stage here. All right, I think the biggest divide in the SAMR model is between the augmentation and the modification steps on here, because you're going from merely just enhancing parts of your classrooms to actually having the technology in there. It's consistently used. People kind of have a shared understanding. You might be using it to solve problems on here, but this is where I feel like what's the word? The rubber hits the road, so to speak. So at the modification stage, you're either kind of doing one or two things. I think the way that I interpret it, and you can look at this a different way. You're either generating innovative work, or you can kind of mix these. You're generating work where the students have to work together. So this is where I think you can see things like, you know, problem-based learning, project-based learning, cooperative learning, all that good stuff on here. That's where I think you could start taking advantage of that really complex stuff that the students will be able to get some high yield products on here. And then one extra step right at the tippy top of the level of complexity is the redefinition stage. So the way that I typically look at this is it's creating real world connections. And it's not just like the student's first pass on something, or it's typically not a project that you can get done without it having a couple of passes through some other people and having some revisions on stuff. So this is like the real good stuff on here. This is like things that students would share with like future employers, or this is things that like, you know, they would use to get into some colleges on here. So this is some high level stuff on here that you can take advantage of. And, you know, from these stages, it will look different depending on like the tool that you have on here or what kind of objective that you have. But at the very least, that's how I kind of like try to find divisions between these here. Moreover, Dr. Puentedura has a, I forgot what, oh, yeah, thankfully I put it down there. It's called the SAMR, a research perspective. Quite a good paper on there that he has posted on his website. So there's a link to it down there on the bottom left-hand corner, but something that I wanted to put in here, there is a section dedicated to questions and transitions, like things you could ask yourself to sort of reflect on if you're at this stage, or if you want to try to move from one stage to the next in terms of using a piece of technology. You can ask yourself these questions and try to get a little bit more on here. So yeah, so things like, you know, you're at the substitution stage if you're asking what is being gained by replacing older technology with a new one, or if you want to go from substitution for augmentation, how does this feature contribute to the design, like of your classroom, of your lesson plans here? But I think probably the biggest value out of these come in the augmentation modification. Like I said, that's usually the biggest divide between the different sections over here. But if you have a good understanding of how to get from here to here, you're going to really see some, you're going to really get a payback from the investments that you made in this technology here. So I leave this up here. I think this is a great resources. And yeah, if you like this stuff, go and check out the full paper down there in that link. All right, just taking a quick sippy here. Got to keep the machine lubricated, so to speak. Okay, I want to spend this last little bit here sharing applications, because I've talked a lot about the framework itself, just kind of like setting up a foundation here, but I want you to try to imagine what would this look like in your classroom. What does it look like when you're playing this stuff out? What's a good way of looking at this model and applying it to what you're going to try to do? And my recommendation is start with, what do you want to try to accomplish here? And so what I've done is I've taken each section, each part of the SAMR model, and tried to, I've tried to, I don't know if this is good for this one, but I've tried to make it, what are some generic things that you want to accomplish in really any classroom that would be good for your classroom? And then try to tie in a tool with a specific activity that the students can do on here. Like, for example, at the substitution phase, so I'm thinking, okay, I've received, maybe you've gone through like a Google Tools suite training. They taught you how to use docs, forms, classroom, sheets, all that good stuff in there. And now you're like, okay, great. They trained me. They showed me how to do this stuff. Now what? What am I going to actually use this for? So I started with the number one, that fun, hot buzzword right over there, student engagement. Like I said before, sometimes the simplest use is the best use. Having your students go in, log into docs to take notes. I take notes whenever I do the tech talks, or if I'm in a meeting, to keep myself engaged. I always take notes. Here's an example of my Kahoot, the notes that I took for Kahoot in Tech Talks that I did a little while back. And so I tried to structure this in a way that, like, if somebody else had to do the tech talk, I could just hand it to them and they're like, okay, just go through these points. And it's a good place for me to go back just in case I ever want to revisit any of these tools, and it helps me break it down. But this isn't something that I learned, that I just started doing. This is something that I've learned over time, and it's helped me kind of organize my thoughts here. And this is value that your students can get out, because this is something that, like, I could share with somebody else, and it would help them understand Kahoot, or at least at that level that I have it there. So that's one way to look at it. Another substitution style activity would be assessment. We do assessments all the time. We can do like formative assessments. We can do quick surveys on here. And what do you know? There's Google Forms, which is a fantastic tool in there that lets you do just that. So you can do things like I have a little survey here. And, you know, just in case you want to gather some opinions on, I don't know, let's say tech talks, I would say, you can have, I mean, this is not only good for like sharing and trying to get opinions for students, but also you can use this to grade as well. You can attach points in all of these and just save you so much time on just getting those numbers from your students on here, and it frees you up for the feedback on here. So you can give more feedback to your students and figure out what do they need, how to give the most value to that. And then finally, accessibility. Don't forget, you're trying to reach as many students as you possibly can and reach them out where you're at. It's all about your audience here. So something like, you know, using Google Classroom to allow them to access your lectures online. You could record a part of it, or you could, and I could probably include YouTube on here. Like if you record your own lectures, you can upload it to that, and then you can start sharing some of that out. And so, yeah, something simple like that, like letting students access the notes is so huge, because like, you know, students are going to be absent from class sometimes. That's just part of the game on that one. And it'll be so good. It'll save you time. It'll save them time. And, you know, and parents could look stuff up on there as well. So it's just good for everybody, really. So that is how I'm kind of like taking these purposes. You can go more specific on here. Like you could tie like standards. You could say like, okay, if I'm going to teach this thing, now I teach it every single year. What's the way that I could take this up to the next level? How can I incorporate technology to make it more accessible, more engaging, or just make life easier for me? All right. Let's keep going on some more applications for these other sections here. For the augmentation, one of the common activities I think that you would do is have students demonstrate their own learning here. I think slides is a fantastic way to do it. If they got to learn something, they got to present things with information. And the slides that I have before you is an example of that. I mean, you can have the text, yeah, that's great. But they can introduce things like, you know, a nice little picture that you can have on here. You can see that in all of these pictures. You can click on the links and it sends them to a place that you can take advantage of. Let me not mess with that. You know, I have my goodies pages on here, so that way that you can kind of track and see, okay, what resources are out there that's going to help extend my learning on here. I could have put videos in here as well. And there's all sorts of, I mean, you just really have to look up at the top of your screen. In fact, I love going to these tools and clicking on where it says insert and just seeing what your options are. You would be wonderfully surprised what you could just throw in here, and the tool will work it. It's wonderful magic in here to help you just take it up a level. So yeah, good stuff. Next, another assessment thing on here for the augmentation phase. I'm looking at specific tools. So in this case, there is a tool called Quizzes. It's fantastic. You can use it to deliver formative assessment. And it is a way to get your students involved, especially if you already have things like Chromebooks in your classroom or a set of iPads and something like that one. It's great because it has like elements of gamification in there. And if you're like, okay, that's cool, but I feel like I could use some support on how to make that work, or that sounds great. I would love to hear more about it. We have done tech talks before on some of these tools, or you could reach out to me or Kurt, and we could give recommendations or show you like what are some things, what are some steps that you can take, or some things to kind of keep in mind when you're introducing these tools in your classroom. So yeah, good stuff there. Giving feedback. You're always going to give feedback to the students. You always want to see them improve on here. A very simple feature that comes in basically all the Google tools is the fact that you can highlight a piece of text, right click it, and click comment. So if you're, it's kind of like annotating somebody's paper, like an essay or something when they give it to you, or you just want them to go back in and just get a little bit more polish on there, you can click comment. And it makes it so easy because if you're commenting on somebody's paper or file, that will show up and they have an idea of what you want on there. It's so great. And you'll be able to keep it in kind of like a comment history in there. So if you haven't used the comment feature yet and you've been using the Google tools, you should really not sleep on that feature. It is fantastic. Next, let's start transforming. So this gets a little bit more complex when you're working here, but it's quite all right because when you're working this, you're feeling the groove on this, it's going to be worth the time that you spend here. So something like this, kind of like a more complex activity that you could do here is trying to develop a culture of learning. Whenever you teach your students something in class, there's going to be like those clear divisions. A good chunk of your students will just kind of like get it on like a basic level, and then you'll have the students that are really far ahead and then students that really need some help on here. And you can create a classroom where it is encouraged for them to reach out to these other students as resources. In fact, I think a tool that does that really well is Flipgrid. For those who don't know what that is, it's where students can make or do a discussion, an online discussion. They record a video and they're replying to some topic, or they can reply to each other as well. And just having students work through kind of the digital skill of putting themselves out there in front of a camera and talking and is huge. And it's something that I do a whole lot and I have a whole lot of experience on, and I still like have to fight through the ums, the uhs, that kind of like weird, awkward silence every once in a while when I'm trying to like transition from one thing to another. But it's okay because it's all about kind of like building that confidence, getting them that wonderful opportunity to get that practice. So that way, whenever they do need to like present something in their careers, or they have to present a piece of knowledge or something like that, they have that experience to fall back on. All right. I think that's enough on that one. Next is fostering creativity. Absolutely. This is something that I would love to see more of because your students are so creative. It's just they don't have a whole lot of opportunities to be creative. And so a tool that I think is fantastic. I know it kind of looks like a tool kind of more focused on younger students, but I feel like the older students can enjoy it so much. And I've used this in my grad school and in my undergrad as well. This is a tool called Book Creator, where you basically get to create little digital books. In fact, I have an example of this one here. So I'm going to show you one that I've done. I did in fact, you can access it if you have access to our Learn Upon learning management system. You can get it through this as well. But this was an instructional guide. I wanted to do kind of like a book version of the course that I had over here. And so this is fantastic because you can do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do with the book. Like, for example, play a video that's embedded on here. It's good stuff. It's just introducing people in here. And when you click this arrow here, it opens up and acts like it's a book. You can enter in links. So if I click on any one of those links in my table of contents, it turns to this. So you could use this as a reference book here, and you can just kind of click through it. It looks nice. You have to like sort of design a formatting on here. And one really good thing here is it being accessible. I'm taking advantage of the features here is if I click read to me, top right hand corner, you can't hear it now, but it will read it out to you, which is just fantastic stuff, especially for students that are learning English on here. So great features on there. And this is a tool that you can easily put in your students' hands. The interface is quite easy to use. It's just a lot of menus where you just kind of like pick out what you want and throw it in there and then arrange it until it looks a little better on here. So yeah, I think this is good use of taking advantage of the creativity, giving them a little structure, giving them the tools on here. And then finally, at the highest level of complexity, we have the transformational redefinition stage. Yeah. So one thing, a way that you could use this is try to connect it to people outside of the classroom. I know it sounds a little scary, but you know, having your students connected to things like, you know, social media, like they're putting themselves out there, they're putting their work out there. And it would be fantastic if the stuff that they're putting out there would be quality. They have an idea of what does quality look like, what kind of things are valuable, how do they kind of navigate that in a way that like they could put something out there and they feel good about receiving feedback and making those changes and just kind of building that enduring part of putting your work out there. And so an example of this is that I've built out a publicly shared portfolio. So imagine your student as they're working through, this is something that they could like carry throughout multiple grades, is that they put together a collection of their work that they've done in their classroom. So high value stuff. So this is something that I did for my grad school. You know, it has some of my basic stuff like my name and a nice picture and a little description and a tiny little video that I've made. But it has things like my resume, so I could share this with people who want to hire me. I got a little bit of an essay here kind of describing like, what's my growth? And here are some things I'm reflecting on. This is how I can grow. And of course, there's a page dedicated to my work that I've done on here. So just imagine your student working on something like this. And this is through a Wix website. So this was for free. And there are a bunch of other tools very much like it that you could do. So it's great. I highly encourage for them to learn kind of like the basics of coding on here, but it's great that there's stuff out there for people, even with a low amount of skill, to churn out something that actually looks nice and is functional on here. And this is something that can easily be shared out and improvements can be made and feedback can be given on it quite easily here. And then the last point on here for redefinition is creating a lifelong learner. This is where the Disney magic happens, I say on here, because of the fact that you can create something that's not just limited to that student. It's useful for other people out there. It's something that, you know, they can kind of carry throughout them and encourage more learning experiences out there. Like, for example, I have a project that I've done that's like a self-directed learning experience, and it's just using slides. Like, just because you use a tool quite a bit or it's a common tool doesn't mean that it can't be sophisticated on here. So I have a slides and I'm going to present real quick on here. But the idea was that you were able to use this tool, use this project and like put it on an iPad or something, or put it on a kiosk, and people can kind of guide themselves through it. And so, you know, I had to design like this little color. I designed these arrows. These are just basically images that are links on here that you can click on. You can go back and forth on here. There's some nice descriptions and visualizations on here, but this wasn't something that I could have just like spat out. I had to spend some time on it. I had to share it with other people. I had to get some feedback. I had to make changes on here because, you know, I'm only one person and I only have one perspective, but once you bring in those other perspectives in here, I can create something that is going to be useful to the most amount of people. I'm trying to make this as accessible as possible on here. So cool stuff. All right. Hopefully I've armed you. I am, first of all, thank you so much. If you've made it up to this point, I really do appreciate it. Hopefully I've given you something to at least help you visualize what is the SAMR model going to look in your classroom. What are a couple of uses that you can use? Try to connect your content area to how this can be leveraged to help you out on here. But yeah, oh, and you can always refer back to these applications. I think these slides are filled with all sorts of goodies. But I have a few more minutes. Let's try to wrap some of this stuff up. Let me help you ground yourself here, because I've given you so much over the last 40 minutes here. So let me give you some starting advice. First of all, start small. Start at the smallest level, and I think SAMR model is fantastic at this. Just think, what are some small substitutions? How can I make my life a little bit easier here and there? Even if you're just kind of like a traditional, hardcore, you've been teaching a certain way for a good while, try to open yourself just a little bit and start small and seeing like what little things can I do for me and my students here. Next is let your students play with the tools here. Like I said before, there's going to be those students that, you introduce something on them and they just kind of like latch onto these tools and start doing crazy things that you've never seen before. Great, that's a learning opportunity for you. And on the opposite end of that spectrum are students that could use some support. You know what? Why not have those students that feel passionately about these tools act as a support system for your students here? And that is kind of my third point on here. Anticipate that your students are going to need some support. Great, you don't have to do all this work yourself. Make life easier for you by taking advantage of the resources. And not just your other students, but you have OPSRC. We're here to help. We would love to talk with you or try to figure out situations where we can give you some support on that one. And most of the time, the tools already have like built-in support articles and videos, people talking about it. So yeah, if you already have an idea that some of that stuff exists, great, you can use it and apply it to your classroom. Next is be patient, not only with your students as they're kind of figuring out the tool when you're introducing them, but be patient with yourself. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. I know it is it's anxiety producing to introduce something into your classroom that you're not entirely sure what it's going to do, but keep in mind that's what the SAMR model is. Part of it is you have a plan put in place, and this plan is research-based. This plan has had value for other people, and it's a replicatable thing that you can do here. So be patient and be consistent as possible and try to let those things kind of play out so you can see how does this work for you? How does this work for your students? And then finally, I've said it a bunch of times, I'll say it one more time. I just feel like it's important enough. Focus on your purpose. At the end of the day, what are you getting out of this tool? Because if you're not getting anything out of the piece of technology, don't use it. Yeah, I'm going to leave you on that point. Okay. Last few things I want to wrap up here. I've dedicated the next couple of pages for links that you could use to support yourself with or extend your learning. This page is dedicated specifically to SAMR model. It gives you way more examples on here and more explanations that I think are quite good. I think you could peruse through any of them and get stuff out of them. So take a look, particularly Dr. Ruben's, Dr. Puentedura's blog. He still updates it on there. So take a look. The next 2 pages are dedicated to other integration models. I'm going to talk about TPAC next week, and followed by the technology integration matrix. There's all sorts of wonderful stuff that I talk about that, but we'll save that for another time. I think I've done plenty of talking. I did mention the 2017 National Education Technology Plan. I think that's worth a read. It's a heavy read, I think, but there's some definite great stuff in there that you could pull out of that. The next page is dedicated to ISTE standards. I'll do a thing on that. And then 2 other frameworks that I won't be able to talk about, but who knows, maybe I might do it in the future. And then finally, the last page. Thank you for listening to me talk about the SAMR model. I'm so excited to get to the other ones, but for right now, I just want to share a link to my evaluation, which is right here. This is lowercase t, period, ly, / lowercase ggz, uppercase K, and that's how you can get to that. It won't take you that long, I promise, and it will help us out tremendously. The people you've been spending time with up to this point, I am Kashawn Hopkins. You're also joined here with Kurt Bernhardt, our technology director, and together we make the tech team, which you can reach us at techteam@opsrc.net. I got a link to the slides, but take a chance, let your brain kind of marinate some of this information and go and visit opsrc.net/tech talks and sign yourself up for the next ones. We got some great stuff up on here, or you could suggest some things for us to consider, or at the very end you could look at some previous technology talks that I have done before that I feel strongly about as well. But I think that's probably enough for now. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll take any questions you might have.